Carl, would you like to start with welcome, or would you like me to do that?
In your capable hands, Paul.
All right.
You may need to ask if the congressman is in the general audience so that we can pull him out.
All right, and it looks like we are live. To my fellow Bloom colleagues, Paul Wilkins, Vice President for Federal Policy here at Bloom. I'm joined by my colleague, Carl Guardino, our EVP for Policy. And I'll let you know that we are just waiting for Congressman Khanna to join us. So we apologize for the delay, but hopefully he'll be able to join us soon. And we will get started with our Empowered Communities virtual town hall. And it looks like the congressman should be joining us in just a moment. Thanks everybody for your patience. And there he is. Congressman, welcome. Thank you so much for your time. Thanks for navigating Zoom with us. I was just welcoming everyone and letting them know we were all of our Bloom colleagues and letting them know that we are running just a couple minutes behind. And at this point, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Zaria Chapman, who's an intern this summer from Howard University on the policy team, to welcome everyone to today's event. Zaria, over to you.
Thank you, Paul. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our town hall with Congressman Khanna. Congressman Khanna, it's a pleasure to have you with us today. My name is Zaria Chapman. I am a rising junior at Howard University with a major in political science, and I'm working as a policy intern for Bloom Energy at this moment. In today's town hall, we will be discussing infrastructure, clean energy, climate change, and resiliency with two experts in the matter, Congressman Khanna and our EVP, Carl Guardino. Both Congressman Khanna and Carl have dedicated their careers to these topics, and it'll be a joy to hear from you both. Thank you again, everybody, for coming.
Thank you, Zaria, for that welcome. We're thrilled to have you on the Bloom team. And also thanks to all my colleagues and to the Congressman's staff as well for taking the time out of your busy days to join us to participate in this Empowered Community Town Hall. We're fortunate to have with us today for a virtual fireside chat two Silicon Valley leaders, our very own EVP for Policy and Government Affairs, Carl Guardino, and our local congressman representing San Jose, Sunnyvale, Santa Clara, and Fremont, Congressman Khanna. Representing California's 17th congressional district since 2017, Congressman Khanna serves on the Oversight, Armed Services, and Agriculture committees. He is the Deputy Whip for the Congressional Progressive Caucus and the Assistant Whip for the Democratic Caucus. In addition to representing Silicon Valley and Washington, D.C., Congressman Khanna is an author, professor, attorney specializing in intellectual property, former Deputy Assistant Secretary at the Department of Commerce during the Obama administration, grandson to a leader of India's independence movement, and most importantly, a devoted husband and father. Please join me in giving a warm Bloom welcome to Congressman Khanna.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Paul. Thank you, Carl. I'm looking forward to the conversation. So, Paul, do you want me to make initial remarks, or should we get into the conversation with Carl?
Congressman Khanna, we welcome just a couple minutes of remarks. We'd love to hear what's on your mind, and then we'll jump right into the conversation and questions. One quick programming note. I would remind all my colleagues, we are going to save about 10 minutes at the end of the program for Q&A. So enter your questions into the Q&A box, and we'll address them with the last 15 to 20 minutes of our program. With that, go ahead, Congressman.
Thank you, Paul. As you can tell, I'm back in Washington. We have a busy week ahead of us. At the top of the agenda is voting rights. The Senate is voting today on H.R. 1. You've seen states across this country basically limit the rights of Black and brown Americans to vote, to doing things such as having less polling places in areas where there are people of color, having less time to vote for people in urban areas, less access to absentee ballots. I know some of this seems foreign to us in California, but where everyone in California really is fighting to increase and make it easier to have people vote. But this is not the case around the country. And so the Senate today is voting on the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, HR 1, which is part of HR 1, and would protect the right to vote. I believe we have to have an exception to the filibuster to get this passed, and it's critical to our democracy. The second thing we're taking up this week is infrastructure. We need a bold infrastructure bill. We need an infrastructure bill that's going to put climate at the center. And I have been pushing that we need a clean energy standard, that we need to end fossil fuel subsidies, that we need to have massive investment in renewables and energy storage and all types of the smart grid and all types of energy investment in energy research. And that is an ongoing effort and debate in the caucus. I have said, and several of us believe, that if there's no climate, there's no deal, that it has to be part of any effort. And the final thing, which I'm sure we'll get into, is I've been working with Senator Schumer on Endless Frontiers that passed the Senate, the largest increase in science and technology since the Apollo years in the 1960s, over 110 billion in research funding over the next 5 years. Senator Schumer was the lead in the Senate. I was the lead in the House, and we're now working to get this through the House to fund clean technology, AI, quantum computing, synthetic biology, alternative proteins, and to make sure that our innovation and tech hubs are not just in Silicon Valley, but around the country. I'm optimistic we can get this to the president's desk, and maybe the only bipartisan thing, frankly, we pass all year. So those are the top three priorities right now for me in Congress, and I'm looking forward to this conversation. Carl and I have known each other, I don't even know when we first met, but at least 10, 15 years. And what an exceptional leader for the Valley, and well married to Leslie. And I know KR had something personal come up, but he's been a good friend and someone I've admired for many years.
Congressman, thank you so much for your thoughts and your words. Thanks for giving us a little sense of what you're working on in Washington, D.C. And thank you for fighting on all of our behalfs and for our community's behalf. Let's take it back. It was delightful to see what you're working on in DC. Let's jump back in time a little bit and find out a little bit more about who each of these exceptional leaders are and what drives them. So Congressman Khanna, we're going to start with you. Your parents immigrated from India in the 1970s, seeking a better life. What role did being the child of immigrants play in guiding your career choices?
Well, that's a very good question. I think it certainly gave me a sense of the impact that America has, not just on people here, but on people around the world. When America sneezes, it affects the lives of billions around the world. And I think it made me realize the role that we can play for good and justice around the world. Franklin Roosevelt supported decolonization of India during the height of World War II. Despite actually Churchill not supporting it. And it was America that really led in the movement to decolonize India and the rest of the world. And that part of history was something I was very aware of, having a grandfather who spent 4 years in jail with Gandhi in the 1940s. And then I saw what this country allowed me to do. I mean, born in Philadelphia in 1976, our bicentenary, I had the chance to go to good public schools. My dad had a middle-class job as an engineer, but it had healthcare, never had to worry about going to a dentist. I was able to go to some of the best universities this country and the world has. And I thought, if this country can do that for the son of an immigrant, this country should be able to do that for every American. And it gave me a sense of what America's possibility is, and how we need to make sure that that's accessible to everyone.
Congressman, thank you for those thoughtful words. It really does remind us what the promise of America is and the responsibility we all have to bring it to fruition. Carl, you are a son of San Jose, born and raised in San Jose. You spent roughly 20 years leading the Silicon Valley Leadership Group's work to build the economic and social fabric of Silicon Valley. Your career has been focused on community building. So how does Bloom fit into the arc of that career?
Paul Wilkins, thank you. And to our colleague, Bloom Energy employees, thank you all for carving out your lunch hour today to join us for this important conversation with Congressman Khanna, who I first had the pleasure of meeting when he was serving our nation in the Commerce Department for President Barack Obama, and immediately saw what an amazing servant leader he is. And it's been an honor and a pleasure to call him a friend ever since. So thank you, Congressman Khanna, for joining us. And I just wanted to point out and thank Zaria Chapman, our summer college intern working on federal issues with Paul Wilkins in DC, a student at Howard University, one of 40 summer college interns, many from the 107 historically Black colleges and universities in our country, again underscoring Bloom Energy's commitment to excellence and diversity, equity, and inclusion. And Paul Wilkins, thanks for that great question about my own background. Yes, for nearly 24 years, I had the honor of serving as CEO of the Silicon Valley Leadership Group, which is an association of nearly 400 primarily innovation economy employers in the United States. And when I announced that I was going to step down from that role after a suitable replacement could be found, on the day I announced it, I received a call on my cell phone from someone I have long admired, and that someone is our founder, CEO, and chairman, Dr. K.R. Schroeder, who told me, Carl, I'm pulling over on the side of the road to call you because I never violate the law by making a cell phone call while in the car. So to his credit, he followed the law. He asked me to come in and visit with him that January 7th day, and we chatted. And then when I could leave the leadership group in a respectful way 8 months later, was able to join our team here at Bloom Energy to advance our ambitious and important policy and government affairs agenda. But community has always been what drives me. And at Bloom Energy, we build community with our 1,315 employees here in the United States and their families, but we also build community across the country, especially in the regions in which we and our suppliers and customers are located.
Great, thank you, Carl. Congressman Khanna, back to you. You wrote a book entitled Entrepreneurial Nation: Why Manufacturing is Still Key to America's Future. And you've described maintaining a domestic manufacturing base as a national security issue. What made you write the book, and what would you add to the book if you wrote volume 2?
It's a great question. I wrote the book based on my job in the Obama administration. I was traveling across the country and I was meeting these incredible manufacturers in small towns and mid-sized cities. And I realized that there was a resilience and an entrepreneurship to American manufacturing. And it was a myth that all manufacturing had gone offshore. We actually still were more productive than Japan and Germany, far more productive than China or India. And the thesis of the book is that partly that's because of our entrepreneurial culture, that we don't just have a top-down approach to manufacturing, but even people on the assembly line or whoever it is has an input in the innovative process that allows us to actually have a competitive advantage. And the book tells the story of different manufacturers and how they're competing. But it says that they're competing on an unlevel playing field, that we have to have policies that really incentivize manufacturing from being in the United States. I guess what I would write as a sequel is that this came proven to be critical during the pandemic. I mean, the fact that we didn't have enough capacity to make masks. And Mark Andreessen had a great op-ed in the Wall Street Journal. He said, I understand maybe we don't have enough capacity to make semiconductor chips, but masks, I mean, how is it that the country can't produce enough masks in this country, enough PPE in this country? How is it that we were so vulnerable to critical infrastructure? And I think the crisis highlighted that. So this means that we have to redouble our efforts. And now I think there's a greater consensus in Washington that manufacturing matters, and it's not as controversial. My book probably wouldn't get published now because everyone kind of agrees with it. When I was writing it back in 2010, it was still a debate about whether manufacturing mattered or we could just be a knowledge economy. Now, the good news is people realize manufacturing matters. Even Marco Rubio is talking about basically an industrial policy, and it's really implementing that, which the Endless Frontiers take steps to do in terms of the semiconductor industry. It's a start.
Congressman, I really think you hit on an important point, and that is that the advantage of our manufacturing industry domestically is its entrepreneurial and innovative approach. And we certainly see that from our colleagues on our manufacturing and engineering teams every day in big ways and small. But nothing typifies that more than the work that they did to refurbish ventilators at the beginning of the pandemic, when they shifted on a dime, saw an opportunity, and figured out a way to refurbish all the ventilators that had sat in storage for years and weren't functional. So I think it's a really important point. Carl, over to you for a little bit more discussion about manufacturing. The US has fallen behind China in solar and battery production. China has 93 lithium-ion gigafactories. The US has 4. China manufactures 65% of the world's polysilicon, nearly 80% of solar cells, and about 70% of panels, according to Bloomberg New Energy Finance. Every energy server Bloom makes is manufactured in America. What advantages do you see for Bloom in manufacturing in America, and how can we as a country insource more of our manufacturing?
Paul, great question, and I'm going to respond in 2 ways. First, it is almost ironic, but certainly appropriate, that when Congressman Khanna and I first met, roughly 2010, it was in the conference room at a clean energy manufacturing startup in Sunnyvale. And it just underscored why manufacturing in America is so important. And I'm going to expand on that in a moment, but it's important that we practice what we preach in life. And Bloom Energy does that. We have more than 400 manufacturing jobs right here in high-cost Silicon Valley that people simply with a high school diploma can apply for and receive, getting great training, a living wage with benefits that affords them to be able to live in this high-cost region that we call the Bay Area. We have about the same amount of manufacturing jobs also in the first state, Delaware, the first state in the United States, in Newark, Delaware. And these are just, again, great jobs for folks only requiring a high school diploma. So what are the advantages to domestic manufacturing? A lot of them are underscored in the Congressman's book that he referenced earlier. He's written one book, and I've read that book. And it was an outstanding book, Congressman. So let's talk about some of those advantages. One, painfully, over the past 15 months, we have learned that in this pandemic, it underscored the importance of having a secure supply chain. And as the pandemic accelerated in March of 2020, and we had shelter in place other than for essential workers, those manufacturing employees at Bloom Energy, we all know and knew, were essential. And that global trade and transportation during that time was severely disrupted. And as Bloom sources a significant portion of our supply chain domestically, we were and are less vulnerable than a lot of industries. Additionally, the geopolitical history of the 21st century is going to be defined by the emerging great power rivalry between the United States and China. And this has the potential to reshape global supply chains. Again, as Bloom sources much of our supply chain domestically and from allied countries, we are well positioned for this new geographical reality. Finally, manufacturing in America is a huge advantage in that it allows us to retain firm control of our intellectual property for our energy servers, as well as our future products and growth levers. Building on that, Paul, if I may, so how to insource more manufacturing? And I'm going to focus these quick comments on clean energy manufacturing, as that's our area of expertise. So to insource more clean energy manufacturing, it all comes down to creating domestic incentives to help emerging technologies scale and have market certainty. And hydrogen is the perfect example. A recent report from McKinsey found that with the right policies, by 2050, the US hydrogen industry could support 3.4 million jobs. But other countries in the EU, Japan, are also heavily investing in hydrogen. So the jobs, as the Congressman knows, will follow the market opportunities. So we need to put the right policies in place to make the US the best market for clean hydrogen.
Thank you, Carl. Really appreciate those thoughts and insights, and really appreciate your vision around how we can insource more of our manufacturing. Related to that, and the Congressman mentioned it at the top of the hour, is the Endless Frontiers Act, which Congressman Khanna co-authored with Senators Schumer and Young. Congressman, can you tell us a little bit more about the bill? It's been described, the press has described it as an attempt to reestablish US technological leadership over China. How does the bill work, and how could it affect clean and advanced energy?
Well, Paul, I would say that the bill is an attempt to ensure American leadership, period, in science and technology around the world. And it is a positive vision of how do we innovate and how do we invest in breakthrough science, as opposed to a defensive vision as pitting us against someone. So the bill directs a massive increase in funding to the National Science Foundation and to the Department of Commerce, Department of Energy. At the National Science Foundation, it creates a tech directorate and tasks the directorate to say, cooperate with the private sector on clean technology, on AI, on synthetic biology, on alternate proteins, on electronic manufacturing. And the idea is to work with research universities and the private sector to have grants that will facilitate critical research and development. At DOE, that money will go to the national labs, with the test that the national labs must not just be insular, but must engage with the private sector in developing new technology. And at Commerce, the money will go to different cities to become innovation hubs, to become what San Jose is. I mean, I know San Jose has our challenges with homelessness and with cost of living and with wages, but we are, when you go are in Congress with 434 other people, you realize San Jose is the envy of a lot of places in terms of its innovation and wealth creation and social mobility scores. And so the Commerce Department would direct funding to other mid-sized cities to help them develop that kind of industry and that's regionally appropriate.
Congressman, thank you. And I'm so glad you mentioned making sure that the benefits of innovation are spread throughout the country, because that's really been a theme of your career. And I'm going to return to that in just a second. But first, Carl, following on the Congressman's thoughts, I wanted to hear more about, you spent roughly 20 years as CEO of the Silicon Valley Leadership Group, and you've witnessed firsthand the successes and failures of our startup and innovation economy. What does the US technology ecosystem get right, and what could be improved?
Such a great question, Paul. First, what we get right is that, well, so many things, but I'll start with just a couple, and I'd love to hear what the Congressman's viewpoint is on this as well. But one is that we continue to have a robust venture capital community that is willing to put their wallets where their words are and invest in innovation. And excitingly, they continue to do that around clean, resilient energy as well. So we are working to solve problems because people are willing to put shoulder to the wheel to provide that capital to do so. Second is still world-class universities. that allow people from diverse backgrounds to get a solid education and pursue their dreams in innovation. Third, historically, and we need to get back on track on this, is a welcome mat that hardworking folks from around the world, like Khanna's parents, could come to America, be welcomed in America, and contribute here in America. And I'm going to, since we're using Zoom today, I'm going to use the example of my friend Eric Yuan, who is the founder and CEO of Zoom and a wonderful, humble servant leader. And Eric shared with me over our dinner table at our home a couple of years ago his own story. It took him 7 attempts to secure a visa to leave communist China to come and innovate in America. Imagine what would have happened if he had quit after 6 attempts. If Zoom would have happened at all, it would not have happened here, and it would be a competitor to US companies. Instead, it employs thousands of people in America, is a great innovator that helped us through the pandemic. So as we look at immigration issues, we have to remember that we need policies that allow brilliant people like Eric Yuan, like our founder, CEO, and chairman, Dr. K.R. Schroeder, who came here for college and a better way of life and stayed here, and that we know that it is both on the brains of people like Eric and KR, but also on the brawn that brought my grandparents here from Sicily in 1918 for a better way of life, working in the fruit orchards around San Jose when it was the Valley of Heart's Delight rather than Silicon Valley. So a combination of venture capital, of great colleges and university, and immigration policies that promote the entrepreneurial spirit.
Thank you so much, Carl. And I want to give the Congressman a chance to comment on Carl's good summary, especially highlighting the importance of education and the wonderful both research as well as liberal arts universities that we have here in America. And Congressman, I know you've spent a lot of time working on college affordability to make sure that when graduates are leaving college, they're not burdened with so much debt that it limits their opportunities and limits their choices, or is a deterrent to them entering college in the first place. So I'm curious for your thoughts on what can the country be doing to make sure that college is affordable for all? Because as Carl mentioned, it is such an important part of our innovation ecosystem.
Well, I view it as very simply in the 1920s and 30s, there was a movement to say that we needed high school in this country because the Industrial Revolution required more schooling. And now we should recognize in a digital revolution that we need more than high school. We need 2 to 4 years of more education. And so we should be talking about K through 14 or K through 16. No one was to charge people for high school, and no one should charge people for basic college education. Public college should be free in this country, as should community college, as should 2 years of vocational training. And if you want to go to your UCs or to an Ohio State or Michigan, you should be able to go for free. If you want to go to a private university, then you have to bear cost for that. But we should have free public college, and it should be tied to inflation controls and tuition. So if you want to qualify for the federal grants to be a free university, then you have to commit to certain caps on tuition increases. That is, in my view, what we ought to do. People say, well, this will disincentivize students from having skin in the game. And the president of Ohio State, former president, had the best answer to that. He said, my son and daughter are both PhD students, and guess what? I paid for both of their college education, and they had plenty of skin in the game. So we never say that affluent or upper middle class parents who pay for their kids' education, that those kids don't have skin in the game. I think people can still have skin in the game. And we do need, though, to collaborate with the private sector in job creation programs. The colleges today, I don't think, can be insulated or isolated from the private sector in preparing people for actual jobs. And so those would be some of my initial thoughts.
Great. Thank you, Congressman, and thank you for your leadership on that issue. Congressman, I want to return to a reference you made earlier about making sure that the benefits of innovation and technology are spread across the country. And you've been called Silicon Valley's ambassador to the country for your work to make sure that the jobs and benefits of technology are felt across the country, and that economically depressed regions of the country, like Appalachia, aren't left behind. Carl, the mission statement of Bloom is to make clean, reliable energy affordable for everyone in the world. How can we ensure that marginalized communities, starting right here in San Jose, but across the world, have access to clean energy? Congressman Khanna, let's start with you, and then we'll hear from Carl.
Well, first, I think sometimes we forget how exceptional a place Silicon Valley is where we live. You know, I was joking with Gavin Newsom the other day. We were at a delegation call, and every 2 weeks, the New York Times seems to write an article about how there's this flight of tech companies from Silicon Valley. Of course, it's totally bogus when you look at the facts. You know, the market cap of tech companies in my district, Zoe's district, and Anna's district, going up to Nancy's district, is $10 trillion. Let me say that one more time. The market cap is $10 trillion of this little region. I mean, I don't think that has kind of wealth has ever been produced in human history. And that increased 30% over the last year. So all these articles that there's this exodus from Silicon Valley, it's just factually not true. We have produced more wealth in this region in the last year than probably many years before. And it's not surprising. I mean, if you have the increased digitization of the economy, it stands to reason that those leading the digital revolution will benefit. So we have all of this extraordinary wealth generation. At the same time, towns that have less than 50,000 people in this country have had stagnant wages and declining economic growth since 2008. They have never recovered since the Great Recession. By the way, California also, and I make this point, I told the governor I would, we're the #1 state over the last 5 years in economic growth. It's not Texas, it's not Florida. And by the way, our growth is higher than the United States, Germany, or Japan. The only one country that grew faster than California was China. And so the fact is we have this extraordinary wealth generation, but there have been a lot of places that have been left out. And of course, there's the problem within our own Bay Area, the gentrification of Black and Latino communities not adequately represented in the innovation economy, the challenge of housing, not enough housing supply, so not enough places for people to live. I mean, there is a whole host of challenges within our community. But then there's a challenge that, you know, when Silicon Valley does well, that doesn't mean that Appalachia does well or that Dayton, Ohio does well. It used to be, you know, when manufacturing did well, the coal towns would do well, the railroad towns would do well, and there was a network of mutuality in the economy of the United States. That network has been severed, so that when you see extraordinary wealth generation in Silicon Valley or in Boston or in Austin, you don't see the same wealth generation in rural communities, in Black communities, and Latino communities. The wealth gap, racial wealth gap in this country has increased since the 1960s. I mean, think about that. We ended Jim Crow and the wealth gap has increased. So we have to figure out beyond redistribution, and I'm for taxing the ultra rich more, and I'm for taxing the corporations more. But beyond that, we have to figure out how do we democratize access to wealth generation? How do we allow communities to build wealth in a digital age without asking people to move? How do we allow communities to flourish with some of their traditions and customs kept intact and succeed? And a lot of my effort has been to try to figure out with partnerships with the private sector, with land grant universities, with HBCUs, how we seed some of these digital jobs and innovation jobs in these communities. And one last point, you know, and I have great admiration, obviously, for the president's infrastructure bill, but I wish he would stop saying that he's the next FDR or LBJ, because the 2025 economy is not the economy of the 1940s, and it's not the economy of the 1960s. The reality is in 2025, there are going to be 25 million digital jobs in this country. That is more than construction and manufacturing combined. And it is a disservice to communities across America if we start saying, well, all these jobs require coding. They don't. Or, well, those jobs, you can't do those jobs. You don't need to do those jobs. If you don't have access to these innovation digital jobs, you're going to be left behind as a community in the 21st century economy. We have to be honest about that, and we have to figure out how do we spread that opportunity to places that have not had that opportunity.
Thank you, Congressman, and thanks for your focus and work on this issue. Carl, I'd love to hear your thoughts on how do we more evenly spread the benefits of innovation across the country?
In addition to the articulate comments that Congressman Khanna made, let me just add a couple of thoughts so that we can continue our conversation. First, I'm going to go back to the mission statement that I think is inspiring and essential, especially as we work through this global pandemic. The mission statement of Bloom Energy is that we make clean, reliable energy affordable to everyone on the planet. Again, both inspiring and essential. And that is key if we are going to move all of our communities forward. It is an absolute need that communities and countries around the world have access to clean, reliable energy. I'm just going to comment here at home. Wildfires last year, 4.1 million acres of our beautiful state of California torched and burned. That is bigger than the entire state of Delaware. The February freeze in Texas, and Congressman Khanna, thank you for your work to get more details on that challenging time that impacted millions of our fellow Americans who live in the state of Texas, up to as many as 700 deaths attributed to the February freeze. Hurricane Isaias at the end of July last year along our eastern seaboard that left 2 million people without power. What did all of those situations have in common, whether it was working through wildfires and PSPS events and rolling blackouts in California, through the February freeze in Texas, through Hurricane Isaias on the East Coast? While it impacted communities large and small, it impacted more our underserved communities, who in this state of California typically are also communities of color. And when we don't have clean energy that serves our communities and our communities of color, we are doing a huge disservice to having served all of our communities. And if you have a chance to go back and read a report that Harvard put out in late March of this year, 1 out of 5 deaths on the planet is directly attributable to unhealthy air. And unless we have clean energy in our communities, in countries across the globe, especially as climate impacts weather conditions in the way that we're seeing in California, Texas, the Midwest, the Eastern Seaboard, and around the world, the disproportionate impact is going to continue to fall on the communities that can least afford those impacts, including greater risks of cancer, of COVID, asthma, and other attributes that unhealthy air inflicts on the residents in those communities. So as we lift up others, we have to make sure we do it with clean, resilient energy.
Carl, thanks so much for underscoring and reminding us of the importance of Bloom's mission. Congressman Khanna, President Biden has said that when he thinks of climate change, he thinks of jobs. What provisions in the president's infrastructure plan do you view as key to creating jobs, especially in San Jose?
Well, there are a number of provisions, the clean energy standard being one of them, which would incentivize huge investments in both the private sector and matching public sector in solar, in wind, in energy storage, in battery technology. The massive investments that the president is proposing in both breakthrough technology with ARPA-E and with the laboratories, as well as the direct funding that he's proposing for innovation in solar and wind and clean energy. All of those will lead to jobs. The electric vehicle charging stations that he's hoping to lay out, infrastructure will lead to jobs. The investments in high-speed rail will lead to jobs. So there are a lot of proposals that he has that will lead to millions of new jobs. And these jobs will be in San Jose, of course, but across the country.
Thank you, Congressman. Carl, anything you'd like to add on that?
The American Jobs Plan, as Congressman Khanna just mentioned, is not only going to create jobs, but it's going to continue to create innovation. And I sincerely hope, for the good of our country and the planet, that we continue to emphasize that infrastructure is certainly the traditional roads, highways, bridges, transit that we often hear about, but with the challenges to the grid continuing to impact communities and states across our country, that it is robust when it comes to energy and climate, as the Congressman just stated.
Thanks so much, Carl. Being mindful of everybody's time, I want to have one last question before we go to our lightning round. So Congressman Khanna, let's start with you. We ask a lot of our energy system. We need it to be affordable to ensure everyone has access. We need it to be resilient to climate-induced extreme weather and cyber threats. We need it to be sourced domestically, or at least from allies, to ensure that adversaries can't hold our economy hostage, as happened with the 1970s energy crisis. And we need it to be clean to address both the climate crisis and protect us from local air pollution. Can we have it all? And if so, what policies are needed? Congressman, let's start with you.
Well, I think we can. We have no option but to have a all of the above approach. I mean, you have a situation where we know that in the next 10 years, we have to have bold action to keep the temperature from rising less than 1.5 degrees Celsius. We know that the United States' leadership is critical if we're going to have any influence on India and China and other nations. And we know that we're behind. We lost 4 years with Trump. We have not taken the measures that the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change recommends. So I am for an all of the above approach. We have to invest massively in solar and wind. We have to invest in energy storage. We have to invest in energy efficiency. We have to invest in energy distribution. We need to look at nuclear as an option. I think that has to be on the table. We have to be very intentional in seeing where the science takes us, and also in encouraging new breakthrough science of the type that Bill Gates with Breakthrough Energy is doing. So I do think we can do it all, but beyond do it all, I think we have to take that kind of a comprehensive approach.
Great, thank you, Congressman. And thanks for reminding us of the importance of the positive vision of US leadership and the role it can play. Carl, over to you. What do you think are the key policies to making sure we can have it all when it comes to energy policy?
Well, first, I want to comment on the dexterity and flexibility of Congressman Khanna, whose camera fell over. He did not miss a beat. He kept his train of thought, was articulate as always, while readjusting his own camera. My hat is off to you, Congressman.
Thank you.
Well done, my friend. Yeah, I'm going to comment on something my friend and California Transportation Commission colleague, Dr. Joseph Liu, who's the CEO of the California Coalition for Clean Air, recently remarked. And it's about having it all when it comes to clean energy. One, as we focus globally, climate, let's not fail locally, clean air. We have to be able to accomplish both simultaneously. Climate is a crisis that we are helping to address here at Bloom Energy, and hopefully in our personal lives as well. And it's going to take robust and bold policy action here in the United States and around the globe. And my hat is off to you, Congressman, for what you're trying to accomplish with our president and others to accomplish that goal. At the same time, we cannot forget the impacts that a lack of clean air have on too many communities. It's why our mission statement around clean, reliable energy is so important. When we eliminate 99.99% of NOx and SOx and particulate matter 2.5 and particulate matter 10, what does that mean to a human being? Less cancer risk, less COVID risk, less asthma risk, less premature deaths. All those are impacted by that goal. When we're talking about our country, when 40% of all fresh water in the United States of America is used in the production or cooling of energy facilities, when we, as you know, after startup use pretty much no water, we know we can do better as we address both energy and the availability of clean water in our country. So there is much we need to accomplish at the global level with climate and the local level of air quality and water, especially as the Congressman knows from his representation in our area, his conversations with Governor Newsom just 2 weeks ago, that we are now entering into what will look like the third biggest drought in the history of our state.
Congressman Khanna and Carl, thank you so much for your thoughtful answers to these questions. We're going to enter our next phase of the conversation, the lightning round. So, Congressman, this is a Carl Guardino invention. Rules are, for the lightning round, you get a word or at most a sentence to answer each of these questions. And once we're done with the lightning round, then we'll open it up to audience Q&A. So, Congressman, we're going to start with you, and then we'll go to Carl. Each of you can answer both questions. Congressman, what's on your summer reading list?
I am Frederick Douglass by David Blight.
Great. Carl?
Well, I just finished Promised Land by President Barack Obama and am now about halfway through Doris Kearns Goodwin's Team of Rivals.
Great books. Great books. So, Carl, we're going to start this one with you. What one activity or event are you most looking forward to doing in person?
Oh, you mean post-pandemic?
Post-pandemic. Now that you're vaccinated, what are you most looking forward to?
August 17th, having our summer college interns in our backyard for a celebration dinner. Great.
Congressman Khanna, what one in-person activity are you most looking forward to?
Well, my son's 4th birthday, because that's all we can talk about in my household these days.
Rightly so. Congressman, what's your favorite form of exercise?
You know, my wife makes fun of me for this, but I say walking. I always get 10,000 steps in. She thinks it's completely insufficient at my age, but that is my go-to.
Good for you. Carl, favorite form of exercise?
Well, contrary to popular belief, it is not running my mouth off. My wife and I are triathletes, and so we love to run, bike, and swim. And with 3 kids, it's harder to do all 3. So we're going to do a duathlon this season. And we love our Sunday morning bike rides before church.
All right. Next one is a 2-part question. We're going to start with you, Carl. Favorite healthy snack and favorite not so healthy snack?
Oh, my goodness. Congressman Khanna mentioned his son turning 4. My son Jake turns 5 this summer. So my favorite healthy snack right now is we stand on our back step in the backyard and we have cherry seed spitting contests. So the favorite healthy snack right now is cherries. The favorite less than healthy snack, I will admit, I'm never too far from chocolate.
Do love a good Reese cup. Congressman Khanna, favorite healthy snack, favorite not so healthy snack?
A favorite healthy snack is probably oranges, and not healthy snack is I love masala chai, which they put a lot of sugar in, so it's not good for you.
But it's delicious. Congressman, we're going to give the last question for you. And since you're a Warriors fan who grew up in Philly, I have to ask, Who's the better point guard, Stephen Curry or Allen Iverson?
Steph Curry for sure, but not just, Iverson was very talented, but I think Steph Curry is a better judgment on holistically on the game.
Great answers. Okay, Congressman Khanna, Carl, thank you so much for having a little fun with us in the lightning round. Let's go ahead and go to the Q&A and see what questions we have for the Congressman from our colleagues. All right, we have a question on immigration. So on immigration, what will Congress do to protect the immigration process from the whims of each new administration? Both H-1B and asylum visas became harder to get in the previous administration, and it seems the immigration system is still not processing and accepting as many applicants as it should. How can Congress ensure a more consistent and inclusive process and set of policies for those seeking visas? Great question from Kim Smith. Congressman, let's start with you.
Well, it's been a colossal failure of American policy over the last 2 decades. We just have not had a rational immigration policy. We haven't been able to get our act together to do it. Everyone knows who's thought about this, what needs to be done. I mean, we need to have a path to citizenship for those who are undocumented. We need to protect our borders to make sure that people are coming through the proper process. We need to eliminate the country cap so that you don't have a situation where there's this huge backlog on H-1Bs from certain countries and that they're not being able to become citizens. Of course, we have to make our dreamers citizens. So the broad outlines of what has to happen are known, but the politics have gotten in the way, and it's really hurting our country's competitiveness.
Congressman, I'm glad you pointed out the politics being an impediment, because we've got a question on that subject as well. And it is, how do Republican and Democratic members of Congress work together again in sort of the hyper-partisan atmosphere that we have in the country? Is it possible?
Well, in Endless Frontiers, we worked together. I worked with Todd Young at Indiana, Mike Gallagher, a Marine from Wisconsin, and Schumer. It's a massive bill that's going to transform and increase science that's totally bipartisan, bicameral. But more broadly, and I don't want to sound partisan, but you have to start with the Republicans recognizing that Joe Biden is the legitimately elected president. I mean, you have over half the Republican caucus that doesn't believe that. It's very hard to find bipartisanship with people who don't recognize that basic fact.
Carl, I'd love to get your thoughts on this too. You've spent so many years of your career at the leadership group, bringing diverse interests together. What are the keys to success? How did you do it there? And what can the country do to come together and move forward?
Wow. Paul, thank you. Bringing people together is probably the hardest but most important thing that we can do as citizens and as a company and as a country. And some ways that I have tried to do that is, one, respect different points of view. Actually listen to people who have a different point of view than we may have. Second, always assume good intent. I think it's too easy to think someone who thinks different from us is somehow the enemy or the opponent, when in fact they may just think different from us based on their own life experiences and paths that they've taken. A third, I think, is a reminder of something that I've always called my 95-5 principle. And when you're trying to build community and you're trying to build consensus, we sometimes forget that we may disagree stridently about 5% of the time. And we may actually agree on some of these core issues about 95% of the time. Yet we can get so focused on the 5% where we'll probably never agree that we lose sight of the 95% where we could be making progress to improve our country and our communities or even our company. So let's focus primarily on the 95%. And that doesn't say to ignore the 5%, but to realize where we can be making progress together in a really positive way.
Thank you, Carl. We want to be sure to end on time and respect the Congressman's schedule and time so that he's eager to come back to Bloom. I think we've got one more time for just one more question for the Congressman before we turn it over to my colleague, Katie Felt, for the closing. Congressman, a question that we have is, what do you think are Silicon Valley's biggest challenges, and how can Bloom help as a good corporate citizen?
It's a very good question. I think Sam Liccardo had an excellent op-ed, I think it's about 4 or 5 months ago now, articulating some of those challenges. One I would say is housing. I mean, we need more housing supply. And I don't know how much more bluntly to say it. Yes, it's good to have comprehensive policies and an approach on appropriate regulation, but ultimately we need more housing supply, and that we just haven't had enough of it in the appropriate places in the Bay Area. Second, we have to recognize those communities that have been left out of the innovation economy and the innovation wealth generation because of gentrification, or because of not being paid a fair wage, or not being able to have adequate protections, and we really need to make sure that they're benefiting from all of the broader economic success. And then third, I would argue is that we need to ensure that we are not having bureaucratic slowdown in approvals. That doesn't mean that we diminish in any way important environmental standards or labor standards, but it does mean that we should be sensitive that we're living now in a nationally competitive and globally competitive environment, and we need to be very capable and adept at ensuring that we retain our advantage of having the world's best companies in our area.
Thank you so much, Congressman. Really appreciate your thoughts, and rest assured they'll guide our thinking about how we can give back to the community here at Bloom. Carl, want to give you the chance for last thoughts and comments before we turn it over to Katie.
Thank you, Paul. And I'm going to build on what you just said about building community. Congressman Khanna, if you're in town on Sunday morning, August 22nd, we're going to continue to build community through Bloom Energy with our inaugural Stars and Strides run and walk, so you can get in those 10,000 steps that your wife asked you to get in.
Did you just add the walk in there, or was that part of the original conception?
Always. There's walk, jog, run, race. It's for everyone. But we are organizing an inaugural Bloom Energy Stars and Strides 5K and 10K run and walk in downtown San Jose, to benefit the Valley Medical Center, VMC Foundation, and those frontline healthcare and hospital workers who have so valiantly kept us healthy these last 15 months of the pandemic. So please come on out and join us. We'd be honored to have you.
Would love to. And I'm back a lot, obviously, in August because it's recess. So hopefully it works out.
Fantastic. Thank you, sir. And Paul, thank you for moderating today.
Thank you, Paul. You did a great job.
Thank you so much, Congressman Khanna. Thank you, Congressman Khanna. Thank you, Carl. Thanks, everybody, for your time today. And for our closing, I want to turn it over to my colleague, Katie Felt, from our Customer Installations Group. Katie, over to you.
Thank you, Paul. Firstly, I'd like to add my thanks to Congressman Khanna, Carl, and you, Paul, for all of your dialogue on such important topics and the unique perspectives that you guys have shared with us today. Sincere thanks to the three of you. I'd also like to thank everybody who's on the line who is able to join today to hear how key policymakers like Congressman Khanna are having a positive impact on our community, our company, and the clean energy industry in general. Personally, I find it incredibly rejuvenating to step back every now and again from our day-to-day work for discussions like these, which are such a wonderful reminder of the profound impact Bloom's mission and the way we go about achieving it can really have on our community, our country, and on the world. It fills me with the same sense of optimism as I had on day one almost 10 years ago at Bloom, and reaffirms that all the hard work we do is so worth it. Together with policymakers like Congressman Khanna, we really are making a difference. I hope today's session has had the same empowering and motivating effect on each of you as it has had on me. Thanks again for your time today, and now let's go out and continue to make Bloom's mission a reality. Have a great day, everybody.
Well said, Katie. Great job.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Congressman. Thank you,
Thank you,
Paul,
Carl. Thank you, Paul.
Katie, Zaria, and our
Thanks,
great
everybody.
communications team.